right. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are here in the fifth and final block of presentations from this massive session. We had 3 blocks yesterday. One which was more the science-related aspects of it, because it is, after all, a science session. This morning, we also opened up to have other perspectives, other knowledge inputs. So we had co-creation and indigenous knowledge focus this morning. And this final part is supposed to be a bit of a synthesis part, I think, where we try to put it all together. We have several topics that we can talk about. We will have 4 speakers today. 1 plenary speaker, followed by 3 ordinary talks, and then we invite certain people on the stage here to be moderated by also the co-organizer, of course, of the session is Raúl Primiserio in the front row, professor at UIT. I myself am a researcher at the Norwegian Polar Institute, and we are very grateful and thankful to ArcticFrontiers so we could have such a big session and drag out so many concepts, I think. So our first speaker would be Ronja Wedegaardner. She is gonna give the keynote talk for this afternoon, and she'll be talking about effective conservation in a rapidly changing Arctic Ocean. Ronja has been the project lead with the WWF Global Arctic, basically pulling this huge thing off, I would say, which is very impressive. And without further ado, I invite Ronja to the stage to give a talk. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for listening. And thank you for the nice introduction of bringing together science and indigenous knowledge. I can say that our project on effective conservation in a rapidly changing Arctic Ocean is based very much on the knowledge of on the knowledge that we need to bring together people across knowledge systems. So I was a project lead, but we were a rather big project team that brought together experts from academia, conservation, nature protection, but also from indigenous peoples' organizations, people who work there with conservation aspects. So if you're standing here on the edge of an ice floe and you're looking out on the Arctic Ocean, you can see the ice edge, you can see floes, you can see leads, you can think about the enormous productivity that is underpinning this ecosystem, and that is underpinning the wealth of this whole region, its ecosystems, but also the prosperity and well-being of its people. Think about the fact that this ice edge is fluctuating with the seasons and yet further and further pushing north as the climate warms. So as we are thinking that area-based measures are one of the most effective ways to safeguard nature and to in of our oceans and human well-being, how can we actually make sure that area-based conservation measures that we design and designate today will still be working effectively in the future? So we do have a need to think about this because climate change is pressing and urgent, and with climate change there's also a push of new industries into the Arctic space. We have to think about the ways, how are we doing this? How are we doing this together? And how can we do this in line with global commitments that have been designated? So how can we stay within the visions of the GBF framework? How can we stay within the commitments of the BBNJ? How can we protect 30% of the Arctic oceans? And how can we do it right? Can we get conservation right? How can we do it in a way that is effective, connected, representative, integrated into seascapes, and equitably governed, respecting and upholding the rights of indigenous peoples? That's not an easy task, but first steps have been done. there has, for example, been a 2015 decision of the Arctic Council to design a network of Arctic marine and protected areas to safeguard biodiversity in the Arctic Ocean. However, implementation is lagging far behind. Currently, roughly 5% of the Arctic Ocean are protected. And we know that the areas that we are protecting now might not be the areas where we find biodiversity in 10, 20, 30 years. So in this project, we came together as a project team across knowledge systems to chart a way forward, to think about how can we come closer to the implementation, how can we build the knowledge base to actually get to a network of 30% of the Arctic Ocean that is protected in this equitable way and also in a climate resilient way. You might have heard about ArcNet before, if you have been to one of these talks before. So WWF has spearheaded an initiative to identify priority areas for conservation. And this is not only a designation of areas, this is a toolbox and an approach. And with this project, we are seeing it as something that builds up on this approach, but adding a special focus on, of course, the question, how can we stay effective in the context of a changing Arctic? How can we bring together conservation approaches, stepping away from the purely science-based? How can we stay consistent with evolving legal conceptual frameworks? It's a tall order, but I want to just clarify a few basic terminology things before I dive into this deeper. So whenever I say area-based in the context of this project, area-based, of course, means clearly delineated, having a border because legal frameworks need borders. However, whenever we say area-based in the context of this framework, it also absolutely includes all end areas under indigenous management, as we recognize them as inherently place-based. Then, in addition, when we are talking about tools and measures, tools, there you can basically think about what's the thing that gives our, what's the border thing with borders? Is it an MPA? Is it a marine protected area? Is it an other area-based effective conservation measure? Is it an indigenous protected and conserved area? And measures that are all actions that we are doing that are contributing to conservation. And we sum this up in the context of this project as MPCAs, as marine protected and conserved areas. And this is including indigenous approaches. And we are quite mindful about the terminology because sometimes area-based conservation approaches have and can have implications of colonial exclusion of peoples from their lands and from subsistence measures. And we are thinking is in a network. As we are moving further, I'm also going to speak about dynamic and adaptive MPCAs. And one could think, well, dynamic and adaptive, isn't that the same thing? Both are, in a way, responsive to a changing climate. Well, there's relatively narrow definitions as we are getting into the literature. So adaptive in this context means as we see that something changes, we go into a process to adjust based on these changes. So, for example, you can see that the habitat where seals pop, it changes and it moves further north. Maybe then we need to move a protected area further north as well. And this can be a tedious process within bureaucratic frameworks, but it also mirrors approaches that are already being implemented by many of the indigenous peoples in the Arctic as they're managing the ecosystems around them based on long-term knowledge and system-based thinking. Dynamic measures, however, are not that different. They also react to a change, but they basically go into this with a framework of if A happens, then we will do B. So if ocean area hits a certain temperature, then we will shift something further north. So it's a pre-designed process, and that's still not as much implemented as adaptive measures, but there's first steps towards this. For example, if you're thinking of the East Coast in the United States, there, if there's a whale in a certain area, the shipping lane will close down, and you will have basically a time-restricted protection of an area. So this would be a dynamic measure. When we are thinking about these MPCAs and how can we future-proof them, then I think we're getting into the realm of networks. So the purposeful design of networks of MPCAs has been identified as a key tool for the adaptation and resilience of oceans. And whenever we are thinking about why a network, why not a single area, a single area will very often be focused on one ecosystem component, one species, one ecosystem, whereas networks are not only safeguarding the ecosystems and their components within them, but also the processes and interactions between them. So this is inherent in the design of such networks. As we are designing networks, we need to try to think into the future. So we need to have good climate predictions that we use, and especially in an Arctic context, it's critical to also include sea variations of climates into these predictions, because how small the ice gets one winter, for example, can have massive implications for the amount of ice that is drifting through a strait and basically has trickle-down effects on the whole ecosystem. And then if you are trying to implement a network, you might have to cooperate across jurisdictions and coordinate, because ideally a network should be designed at the ecological scale. So we all noticed in the Arctic, they don't suddenly stop where there's a country border. So we need to think about conservation and networks from the perspective of the ecosystem. And in this whole context, the ArcNet framework can guide such a network design. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this now. So when you're designing for networks of conservation, for networks for conservation at ecological scales, one thing that is of course crucial is that you select criteria that enable this safeguarding into the future, to actually find the right areas and designate areas at the right size, because it's a large ocean. Of course, we could just protect the whole ocean, but as conservation is frequently also associated with a cost, we are trying to look for a solution that allows us to protect as much as possible while minimizing the costs. Again, we think about protecting the full range of biodiversity, and another component that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the next slides is designing for connectivity and how collaboration can build networks. So, as we are thinking about identifying areas of ecological significance for the design of networks, there is many different frameworks that can help us, but we have picked out some of these criteria that we think are especially important in an Arctic context to provide the effective conservation even under changing conditions. So in the Arctic, areas of high productivity, such as the ice edge or polynyas, are very often associated with very high diversity of species as well. So one approach to identify areas for protection is to look where are areas of high productivity and where are areas of high productivity that are actually not dependent on the climatic circumstances, but that are dependent on other criteria. So for example, if you're thinking about topography or nutrient influx, this can be features that confer a large productivity and thereby also large diversity. An example for this would, for example, be an ocean canyon where a river flows into the Arctic Ocean. So there you usually have a lot of topography, but you also have a lot of nutrient input through the river, such as, for example, the Mackenzie River in Canada. And when we talked with our collaborators at the Indigenous Peoples organizations, one of the things that they shared was that very many of the Inuit settlements are at the mouth of such large rivers that confer this productivity and diversity, thereby selecting areas that are richer than others. Then we can put a focus on areas of special importance for ecological processes. So we can look at the areas where species or ecosystem features mate, migrate, reproduce, and see from what are the determining factors for the fact that it is here. Maybe it doesn't make sense, or it's useful information to understand that whales are migrating here, but it's even more useful to understand why are they taking this route. Because as we have this understanding of the factors that influence these critical ecological processes, we can think into the future and think, okay, if these factors are changing like this, maybe we should extend this area a little bit into this direction. Maybe we should plan this in a responsive manner. So as these factors are changing, we can actually take this into consideration. And then, of course, in the Arctic, as in many other places, you also have areas with especially unique and rare biodiversity. And these unique and rare biodiversity features often contribute disproportionately to regional biodiversity. And protecting them can help us to safeguard overall biodiversity in the region. But we don't only have to think about the where, we also have to think about the size. Because if we take an area that is too small, we might not be able to ensure the actual viability of the ecosystem features within the area. So we need to gain an understanding of the area needed to actually thrive. And this can be based on science, but this can also be based on indigenous knowledge and best on the combination of the two of them. If we are thinking about a science tool, for example, population viability analysis can be one of the tools that help us in determining this. I think I've mentioned it cross-cutting already, but including indigenous knowledge when setting these MPCAs is quite crucial in our eyes, because the Arctic is large, we can't be everywhere, and not everything can be measured with sensors. So bringing indigenous knowledge into conservation planning, especially indigenous knowledge that stems from multiple communities and therefore maybe gives a better overall view or also a better understanding of connections, can be very helpful together with other science. And as we are deciding where to protect in the Arctic, we have to keep in mind that the Arctic is the home of species and ecosystem features, but also the home of people that live in it, especially along its coasts. So co-identifying areas of special importance to humans, such as areas used for harvesting or for traveling on ice, can be helpful in the designation of areas. And then, last but not least, those of us who work with conservation are always afraid of a catastrophic event that might affect one protected and conserved area. But we can try to safeguard us against such catastrophic event by ensuring adequate replication, so having multiple similar or multiple areas that can protect similar ecosystem features. And as we are protecting these, if we are replicating, for example, this can also potentially help species on the move as they are adapting to changes in climate. However, when species are on the move, we need to think about the distance between the places that they're moving. So we have to keep connectivity in mind as we are planning our network. So safeguarding structural and functional connectivity is paramount when we are designing such a network. Structural connectivity in this context would encompass things such as ocean currents that make it more or less impenetrable for a species to move from one point to another. But another thing that we can see as a structural barrier could also be sound that keeps species from one area. Whereas functional connectivity is thinking more about the safeguarding of the ecological processes. So are the connections in the food web, for example, still safeguarded as we are designating this network? Again, we don't have perfect knowledge from science yet, but we do know a lot, and we can use rules of thumb, and we can combine this with other knowledge sources and can make good estimations. And having good estimations is way better than not considering it at all. And then again, thinking a little bit about size. Of course, we can protect the whole ocean. The money to protect, or the cost to protect the whole ocean, this might be rather difficult to explain. But if we are trying to be smart and designate protected areas that are anticipating changes in the future, we might be able to make smart choices about size while still safeguarding critical biodiversity features. So, how do we design a network? I'm just going to sum it up very briefly. So we think about the areas of ecological significance, about oceanographic features that can give us a lot of productivity, about the ecological processes that we want to safeguard, about the unique and rare ecosystem features. We have to think about adequacy and viability. We should include indigenous knowledge and the areas of special importance to humans. We need to keep replication in mind. We should think about connectivity, size, and adaptability. And then, we can finally design a network. So good that there is tools that one can actually build up upon, such as the ArcNet approach, and that one can supplement with additional knowledge. So, I don't have much time left, so I'm just gonna. Okay, so how do we get it right? Well, we collaborate across borders and jurisdictions. We establish cooperative processes that are needed for the development of a pan-Arctic network of marine protected and preserved areas. And we make sure that the government is and management of individual areas in the network are adaptive to the dynamic conservation needs of biodiversity. We make sure that conservation practices and knowledge of indigenous peoples are integral and respected, and we think that there's opportunities for expanding on available indigenous-led dynamic approaches and tools. And we think that it's crucial that indigenous leadership and participation in area-based conservation is given so that we can equitably manage conservation areas. And we need to design and be open for additional knowledge. So here we can build on what we already know, and we then include what emerges to facilitate broader engagement. And the competence is already there to designate adaptive and dynamic measures and tools. We might not think about our government processes, but nothing says we can't have adaptive and dynamic tools. So the legal knowledge for establishing dynamic and adaptive conservation exists now, and aligning this with the opportunities of the GBF and BBNJ to live up to their commitments and obligations is crucial. We really need to increase the speed of implementation, because networks are crucial for protecting and conserving Arctic biodiversity, but only by thinking and working together across knowledge systems and across borders, we can bring about the momentum that is needed. If you want to read more, a first version of the report with a lot more details, also about the legal side of things, can be found there. So please check this out and ask me some more questions. I'm sorry that I had to speed up a little in the end. I thought this one was in 15 minutes, so I got a bit distracted, sorry.
Thank you very much, Ronja. Thanks for this overview on both the demands and challenges for management, but also some of the solutions that have been proposed with the dynamic and adaptive aspects. We will have a panel debate by the end of this session where we can address more questions on the issues covered by Ronja. There might be time for just a quick question before we need to move on. Thank you, Ronja, again. So any questions? We have the panel debate to follow up on Ronja's talk. Thank you, Ronja.
All right. So let's dive a little bit deeper, no pun intended here, but still, we have our next speaker who's excellent in doing that. We have Professor Bulle Blom from the university here in Tromsø, and she'll be talking about benthic habitats and biodiversity in the Arctic Deep, how we can implement the 30 by 30 agreement, and how we could do that. So thank you, Bulle, for coming on the stage.
Thank you, and I should have probably put a question mark at the end because I would like some answers from you. But I think this talk fits actually very well after yours. Thank you so much. And I acknowledge the many co-authors here and would like to build on the previous talks and actually also the previous sessions that have mentioned the 30 by 30 agreement many times, which then has in its section 8, target 3, of course, this protection goal of 30%. Of marine areas, also land areas, but I focus on the marine, and of areas that are of particular importance to biodiversity and ecosystem function. So if we take that to the Central Arctic, that's what I want to explore a little bit. And the Central Arctic being using the framework here of PAIM, the lines inside the red line here in the center, the large marine ecosystem Central Arctic Ocean. And part of that overlaps with the high seas. That's the green line. We've had a nice session on the high seas and the BBNJ agreement, maybe 2 days ago. It seems like a long time ago. And you see that this element of the Arctic Ocean overlaps partly with the high seas and partly is a national jurisdiction. So that's sort of our framework for this. We've seen this map now a bunch of times. And so what I want to explore here is what could be some areas at the seafloor that fit these definitions. And that's, of course, what WWF has a lot of done a lot of work on, with many of us involved. And so we focus on a few of those areas that are green on this map and explore them just a little bit. So for the seafloor here, I feel like I'm tied to the microphone, but I guess I have a laser pointer, yes. But the seafloor, part of the issue, of course, is that we don't actually have a ton of information on some of these areas. And what we did in a paper here some years ago, or not that long ago, actually, we tried to pull together the data that were available or accessible. I'm sure that's not everything out there for the seafloor on species records, a species record here being a particular worm at one place and one time. And this is what you get. This is in a gridded way here showing with a lot of sort of light yellow that we have 1 to 200 records of what was there, which isn't too much. And then we have some point where we have some sort of cluster of knowledge. And that's our current baseline. If you're saying, but my data are missing, please come and make them available. Then we have more records. But based on that, we explored the question, and that was a really interesting discussion in the deep sea mineral session there on when do we have enough information to act? And that's a difficult question. We do have some information. And so for the criterion of diversity, high diversity or special diversity in that definition there, we know that we have now I can barely see that. Maybe I'll fall off the stage and you have to rescue me. I show in the top of the slides here always with these little arrows here where we are currently on the slide. So we have some super cool areas in the Central Arctic Ocean on the ridge system here, Gackel Ridge system of Jurassic Seamount, which to my knowledge is one of the very few north of Fram Strait, if not the one, that's investigated. And what the team found is, for example, these cool sponges that actually move around and leave trails. There is some really cool video out there on how these sponges are moving and subsiding on old carbon in no longer active seeps. So quite some interesting life forms. We know from the Aurora vent field on the Gackel Ridge north of Fram Strait that there's endemic life. There's interesting chemosynthetic-based system in both of these. This is a picture from the 2015 drift of Yngve Kristoffersen, who drifted across the Arctic for a year, more or less by himself with one other person, and has wonderful deep-sea images, including these bacterial mats here on Lomonosov Ridge. And so we know there are areas that have special diversity on the ridges in particular that maybe match this criterion in a bit more detail in the documents. We also know and heard in the session on the Arctic deep sea, I think that was by University of Bergen in particular, a wonderful session a couple days ago, that there are a lot of those types of habitats here south of Fram Strait. So one of the questions, of course, connectivity, that the point that you just brought up. How unique or not unique are these areas? And that's still a big knowledge gap. And that's actually what that slide also shows a little bit. So in terms of special habitats, now we go from species to habitats. We know that ridges in particular are diverse in habitat because they are mountain essentially, or mountain range. There are seeps, there are vents, there are seamounts, there are basic sediments, sedimented areas, there are all kinds of depth differences and so on. So a lot of different types of habitats. In this area, what one of our master students here did, Ida Söll, in this slide here, she pulled together what was at the time public knowledge or published from a species. You don't need to read the species names, but know these are all different species from Aurora Windfield, north of Fram Strait, Lokiskasse, south of Fram Strait, Jurassic Seamount that I showed earlier, Schulzbang, which is seamount south of Fram Strait, and then a regular soft sedimentary area on a ridge. And what I want you to see here, the colors are different animal groups. Basically, if you are drawing a line across any of these blocks, you see that what occurs in one doesn't, these are just random lines that I draw to guide your eye. There isn't too much overlap between these, as we know for now. And I'm hoping that some University of Bergen people say, yeah, but we know a lot more now, and we probably do. And some of that non-similarity is probably because of a lack of knowledge, but some is probably real. So how similar these areas are or how different they are has something to say on exactly what you just mentioned, on how big an area do we actually need to protect, to capture the diversity that is there, and that we don't have the redundancy in habitat exploration yet for the Central Arctic at the seafloor, I would claim. Oh, and by the way, I'm sure the ridges are mineral rich too. Question mark. Criterion of ecosystem function, which is a description and the criteria of the 30 by 30. And here I'm just giving 2 examples. I should watch the time here too, of somewhat random places in the abyssal plain here. The site I'm looking at here, you're looking at is north of Svalbard at the rise, not quite 3,000 meters. What I want you to focus on is this messy looking plot, but it's a wonderfully informative plot in a paper by Eric Yoda Molina, who's with a number of us. What it shows is a properties, so a traits plot. So basically, if you take a basket and you put all the properties of a community into it, that's your collective properties of a community, what they do, what they look like, and so on. So not the species, but their properties. In multivariate space here is all these dots here that reflect different samples and the collective animal properties on the shelf are all clustering together, so they're relatively similar. And then these snowflakes flying around there are not similar. Thank you. And they're quite far away. So they're both spread out. That means one sample is not like the next. And they're not similar to the shelf. So in a wonderful paper that by a deep sea biologist I like, she wrote, the deep sea is deep, diverse, and definitely different. And that's true for the ecosystem functions, it seems. Here's another property that we seem to care about a lot these days, or that we do care about a lot, and that's the carbon sequestration of the deep Arctic Ocean, or of any particular region for that matter. That's what you see an indirect measure of here for the deep areas in the Arctic here, transect through the Eurasian basin here. What you're seeing is the carbon demand, so how much does the benthos breathe away of that carbon that lies in the sediment, basically. In the sediment, we have 0.5% to 3%, probably more like 2.5% of carbon in the sediments, which maybe doesn't sound a lot, but you add up the whole abyssal plain, then it ends up being quite a bit. And so right now, the animals that are there don't breathe much of that away compared to, oh, it's turning orange, I'm getting to the end, compared to the shelves. But if you increase the temperature and give them more to eat, they do breathe away more of that carbon there. Okay, I think I will sadly skip over that, or maybe just say one point to look at effectiveness of conservation. We probably also need to go there a couple times, not just once ever. And which parts of the Central Arctic deep sea floor have we gone several times to? The one that comes to mind is Hausgarten in Fram Strait, and there's a 25-year time series of that where we do see some changes, whether natural or not. So it's dynamic at the same time. Okay, and I think that I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bodil. Thanks for giving us an insight into deep waters. You mentioned something about ridges being now known, so there is some knowledge in some of the formats for future perspective on conservation as well. We have time for a question to Bodil from the audience. It will be an opportunity to discuss with Bodil further these issues on biodiversity in the Arctic.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we move on from deep, diverse, and definitely different to predators, prey, and policy. Quantifying food web dynamics in subarctic and Arctic waters. And to do so, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Benjamin Blank from the Havforskningsinstitut, Institute for Marine Research here in Tromsø. And he doesn't need introduction, I think, for many of you. He's also very known for very good points in his talk, so I'm very thrilled to welcome you on the stage. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thanks everyone for still being here. I think if you're not getting tired after the 5 sessions, I am. So I'll do my best to survive this talk. Okay, so I'm a quantitative ecologist in background, so I deal with numbers, and I think these numbers are important to support the scientific evidence that we need in support. I'm going to talk about numbers and quantification food web dynamics and how that could contribute to mostly fisheries management, but you will see there are conservation issues that will pop up on the way. So before I go on to one of the research I'm doing, I will give you a one-slide crash course in fisheries management for single stocks. So very briefly, the way it works is scientists collect data from research vessels, but also from the fishery. This data is compiled and then feeds into what we call stock assessment models, which are numerical models that reconstruct the dynamic of the population. Based on these models, we provide management advice, which measure the consequence or the risk of fishing at certain levels on the populations. This advice is translated into management decisions that may follow or not all elements of the advice. And then these decisions affect the fishing fleets that operate at sea. And then 1 year later, we start again and we go around the loop. Okay? And here you have the herring in the middle. But where are the predators and prey in that diagram? And that's how fisheries has been working for, and still working for many, many years. And the predators and prey, they are in the hidden assumptions. So for those of you at the back, I know you can't see the bottom of the slide, but the bottom of the slide says they are in the hidden assumption. It's written in very small print. It's like the small print in an insurance contract. The stuff you never read, but when you have a problem, then you start thinking about it. So I will go a little bit into the hidden assumptions and in why we should consider predator and prey and how we can do it to support fisheries management. So the why, what are the kind of ecosystem considerations that are relevant to management and to which aspect of management relevant? So some of these issues can be harvest control rules that apply to multiple species at a time. So if you harvest a prey species and a predator species at the same time, can the rules that have been set for species individually work simultaneously? You have issues like, do we have enough production in the system, primary production, to support all the species that we exploit or wish to conserve? And looking at it from the top of the food webs, what is the level of consumption of all the top predators combined, also on the species that we want to conserve or that we exploit? One issue that is also quite not trivial to deal with is the estimation of natural mortality for exploited species. And this is one of the key hidden assumptions of most models, the natural mortality. It's usually assumed to be fixed and known, and we know it's varying and unknown. And then I will come back to also an important question of competition for resources between marine mammals and fish populations. So I'll try to address some of these issues using something that is called a food web assessment. And the food web assessment is for a food web what a stock assessment is for a fish stock. So I will show you an example of food web assessment that is focusing on multiple species, not every species in the food web, but multiple species. So it's focusing on trophic interactions, feeding interactions. That's the core of the assessment model. It's not a simulation model, it's data-driven. So like an assessment model, it's using data to try and reconstruct the dynamic of the food web. The specific model I will show has been built through a participatory modeling process. I would love to give you a 1-hour lecture on how that works, but I don't have time. But I think that was a very important part of the work. And it's explicit about uncertainties. So we know that there are things we don't know, and we try to quantify this lack of this lack or not lack of knowledge. And what we get out of that is reconstructions of food web dynamics, and I will show you how we can use that. So the model I'm using is called Arcan model. That's for the example. There are several papers explaining this. I won't go into more details for that. So here is the structure of the model. So you see a number of species, and you see many, many arrows, and each arrow means a feeding link. And what we do when we do a food web assessment is we try to put a number on each of these arrows every year. And we've done that for 35 plus years. So it's actually 3,000 estimates that we are trying to make to reconstruct the dynamic of the whole system. And a lot of them are very uncertain. And it's a model that works for the Norwegian and Barents Sea. So I can't show you the full results because that would be 3,000 curves, and that's a bit long to go through. But I can show you an example of a summary across the system, which shows you the secondary production that feeds into marine mammals as a whole, fishes as a whole, and then these that also have interactions with each other. We see that fish are eating fish and marine mammals are eating fish, and part of it is also going to fisheries and marine mammal hunts. Okay, so using this model, I will show you 3 examples that are relevant for policy and management. The first one is to look at the current level of marine consumption of fish and how it impacts fish biomass and vice versa. The second is an example of estimation of natural mortality of herring based on predation. Again, something that I said is a hidden assumption in most stock assessment models. And then the last one is an assessment of multiple management rules, of the compatibility between multiple management rules currently operating in the Norwegian and Barents Sea. So I'll go with the first example. This is a focus on part of the diagrams you've seen before that zooms on the marine mammals. So the marine mammals consumed around 22 million tons a year on average, with some uncertainties around that. And half of it is coming from secondary producers, which are on the left, and half of it is coming from fish that are commercial or non-commercial, that are at the bottom. And you can see the reconstruction of these consumptions, but you can also see that the uncertainties around these are really, really big. So the question is, do marine mammals really compete with the fishery? And if the marine mammal populations were to increase or decrease, what would be the implication for the fish stocks as a whole? And we did that recently in a paper that is actually published today, where we tried to look at not just at the accounting exercise like in the previous slide, but actually causal relationships. So if you change mammals by a certain amount, what would be the impact on fish? And if you change fish by a certain amount, what would be the impact on marine mammals? And the results look like this, and it's quite surprising because it's very asymmetrical. So what we found is that if the biomass of marine mammals was to increase by 1,000 tons, the effect on fish is about 1-to-1. So we expect the fish to decrease by 1,000 tons the next year. But if the biomass of fish is to increase by 1,000 tons in 1 year, we expect the biomass of marine mammals to increase by 10 tons the following year. So these effects are very asymmetrical because of consumption rates, because of the dynamics of the system and so on. But putting these numbers is very important for the debate on are mammals eating our fish when we are fishermen. Okay, move on to the next one, herring, because I don't have much time left. So this is a reconstruction of the herring stock size, the Norwegian spring spawning herring. And this reconstruction in this model is coupled with a reconstruction of the consumption and fishing on herring. So you can see in red on the top is the quantity of herring that has been taken by the fisheries over time. And at the bottom is the quantity that has been consumed by marine mammals over time. So using these numbers, you can actually derive fishing mortality, which is common in stock assessment models, but you can also derive natural mortality. And the natural mortality or predation mortality looks like this. So you see it's very uncertain, and that's because the information we have on mammals, biomass, and diet is very uncertain. But it ranges from 0.1 to 0.8 almost. But you can also see that it varies with time, and there are periods of lower mortality. The yellow line here, for your information, is the line that is used by the stock assessment group. So the assumption in the group is that we've been at the yellow line for the last 35 years. And that might have been true in 2010, but maybe not earlier and later than that. So that's quite informative to feedback in the stock assessment. And the last example was a test to look what would happen if we kept and applied with no cheating, the current harvest control rules and management conservation objectives we have today on the stocks in the Norwegian and Barents Sea. And what would happen in terms of catch? So that's the past, that's the reconstruction, that's the future. What happens in terms of catch is we could actually catch about the same amount as we do today. The difference, so it's possible to continue with the rules we have and catch about the same amount. The difference is that the biomass of the different species would look slightly different from what we have seen in the past. So there are some corresponds to what we've seen. Okay, so last slide. I've seen it 0, 0, 0, 0. Thank you, Elena. The message I want to bring in is that I think numbers are important. Quantifying these things is important. We have known how to do that for a long time for single stock management using single stock assessment models. And what I'm is maybe a possibility to go forward and provide the same kind of quantitative support for ecosystem-based management through food web assessment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Benjamin, congratulations with a new paper, which we look forward to. And also congratulations for addressing this complexity gap, which is behind the ecosystem-based management perspective. There is time for a question for Benjamin. Please, Martin.
Thanks a lot, Benjamin. Super interesting and very, very relevant. And I realized that we're sort of fighting giants here and trying to bring this ecosystem consideration into management. So I just wondered, what has the initial response of the stock assessment community been towards actually including some of these? So, I mean, some of these are low-hanging fruits. You mentioned the natural mortality could be plugged in automatically. So what has been the response so far?
I'll try to give a short answer, but no. So we have a dialogue between the integrated ecosystem assessment groups where this work is developed and the fish stock assessment group where they take it in. It's a very long process, and I can say there is an interest, but we have to learn to talk to each other. And I'll give you an interesting anecdote. So the slide I showed you on natural mortality or predation mortality, I showed these results a few times before, but without using the term mortality. I showed just consumption by minor. And it was almost of no interest to the stock assessment groups. But the minute I translated that into, this is equivalent to natural mortality in your models, suddenly things popped up. So we need to learn sometimes few details, few words, the slight changes in the way we present the information make it suddenly very relevant for the group. So now that this dialogue continues, we have some projects going on to try and refine this work and feed it in the stock assessment. So, but it's not easy, and often I was giving this analogy. I think I was asked by the Fisheries Directorate the same kind of questions, and I told them, you know, when you go into a stock assessment group, even though you may have a lot of ecological knowledge, it's like entering a car. You have one single objective. It's to drive that assessment, and you just look at specific signs and you ignore the rest. And that's what we do when we. I've done stock assessment myself. That's what we do when we do stock assessment. So you
drive it consistently wrong.
No, it's not constantly wrong, but you ignore some signal. And sometimes maybe the passenger next to you has another. That's an important information that you should take into account.
I could just mention that there are some prior precedents of some stocks actually making use of natural mortality from food models. I think it's important to say to these guys that, look, we're actually doing this in other stocks. Yeah. So it could be something to leverage on as an example.
Thank you very much. Benjamin will join our panel at the end of this session. So.
Okay, so let's invite another passenger to this car. A bit more complexity from Erik Mikkelsen from Nofima here in Tromsø. Erik is going to add a little bit of a different perspective, or a very nice grounding, I would say, talking about regulatory requirements and practices for assessing cumulative impacts in the Norwegian and Arctic.
Hello, everyone. Thanks to the organizers of this nice session, or sessions, we should say. So, some work I've done with quite a few colleagues from different institutes, all part of the CLEAN project that Raoul is leading. Let's see, green button, I guess. So, I think I'll start with this as a sort of backdrop. This is a review of academic papers really on the practice of doing cumulative impact assessments. And this is like one of their conclusions, that basically we don't really know them well conceptually, at least not out there in praxis. So there's a lot of need for guidance on how to do that. And then I would sort of ask, well, how is that in Norway then? What do we know about that? And partly we want to see what are demands for doing cumulative impact assessments in Norwegian regulatory texts, so laws and regulations and so on. And how does that differ in a sense between different ecosystems, industries and geographies? And this is of course because they are under different legal regimes in a sense. And then it's also interesting to see, well, how are the practices, not just the legal text and what they demand, but how does this translate in a sense to a practice? And also what are the challenges to doing cumulative impact assessments in a good way, as the practitioners see it. These 5 pictures at the bottom, they are AI generated to illustrate the 5 cases of the CLEAN project, from river systems, terrestrial, fjords and coasts, the Barents Sea and Svalbard, and those are the ones in the CLEAN project. Different types of management may look different at what is a cumulative impact assessment and what it requires. Some types of management is about, or it has the nature and an ecosystem element or a whole ecosystem as its object. For example, we may have a management plan or a concern for polar bears on the left, or we might have a watershed or a water system, like under the Water Framework Directive and the Norwegian Water Regulation. Or it might be a matter of allowing or not allowing specific activities, like aquaculture here in the middle. For the polar bears and for the watersheds or water areas, we really are concerned about the cumulative impacts. It's a matter of saying yes or no to an aquaculture plant. It's more like, do we accept the total impact of this on both nature and different parts of society, human society, to make that clear to biologists here. And of course, the link to cumulative impact assessments with this middle one is that when you consider the total impact of aquaculture on nature, you also must consider other pressures from other sources, and that is a cumulative impact assessment to do. So one thing we've done in our project is to map across these CLEAN cases what kind of laws and Norwegian regulations, which are like specifications on how laws or terms in laws can be actually done in practice, or more sort of delineating these quite often rather general terms that are in laws, like it should be environmentally sound to allow this and so on. Well, what does that mean? That might be in a Norwegian regulation, which are usually made by a ministry or a directorate. So we've done this mapping, and then we wanted to see, well, what do they say about demands for doing cumulative impact assessment in these regulatory texts? And do they also say anything about how to do them? So we went through them sort of systematically, all of these texts following a scheme, and looking for terms that could be relevant for cumulative impact assessments. A few mentioned that very specifically. You know, this here they have to consider the cumulative impacts. Others may say ecosystem-based management there, and these we see as the same, because ecosystem-based management is really about considering cumulative impacts. But many of these other laws, they don't use those words at all. They might say it should be holistic, helhetlig in Norwegian. It should be integrated. It should be coordinated or something like that. Or it should be sustainable. These words might mean something like cumulative impact assessments, but not necessarily. And we are certainly not clear about how managers interpret those words in practice. And then some others don't say nothing at all about anything relevant here. So basically, looking at these different regulatory texts, 6 out of 18 of the laws and regulations we had were very specific, saying either cumulative impacts assessment should be done or it should be ecosystem-based management. Practically all of the management plans we looked at, they had cumulative impact assessment or ecosystem-based management in there, so that was good. But there's little guidance in these documents on how to do impact assessment or what it should entail. And you might say, well, that might be sort of natural. Some of them aren't like that. You should look at guidelines maybe. And I'll return to that. Of course, you can't just say, well, looking at these cases, we can count the number of laws and regulations that have these terms. There is also in Norway like a hierarchy of laws that govern other laws and how the management and the state and all governing bodies should act. In particular, I want to point out the Norwegian Nature Diversity Act and the EIA regulation based on the Planning and Building Act. They guide how other organs and laws should be used. But we see some differences between these different case areas, but I don't have much time to go into that. But this lack of clarity, especially among some of these sector laws and so on, is that a problem? How do practitioners behave? Do they really look to the Nature Diversity Act, or do they have their own sort of sector act as their Bible, so to speak? Yeah, I'll leave that hanging for a bit. Turning very quickly to something on practices and barriers to doing this. We've done a survey to people that either manage nature or manage human activities that can influence nature. A survey going out to different people in state agencies, to municipalities, to regional authorities, and also to some consultants that support managers in doing assessment that are important for doing this governing. 76 respondents, roughly 3 out of 4 say that they do cumulative impact assessments to a large, very large, or moderate degree. So they should be at least some level of knowledge about what this entails and relevant to ask about how is the practice and what are the barriers. And we asked them about, do you have guidelines? Do your organization have a guideline, partly to do impact assessment on nature for the field that you work in? And as you see here, most of them do. Some say no, and quite a few don't know. I found that interesting. And that was general guidelines for doing impact assessment, and then we asked them, well, do they have something on cumulative impact assessment in particular? And the story is a bit similar. There's a few that don't really know if they do. And then we also asked them, do you consider interaction between stressors when you do this sort of thing? I mean, this is really at the heart of cumulative impact assessments. And 2/3 of them say, yeah, we do that often, or to a very large or moderate degree. And then we ask them, well, how do you do it? And they say, well, a few quantitative models or something, qualitative, and quite a few say, oh, we just, in Norwegian, we do skjønnsmessig vurdering. We do it discretionary. Last slide practically. Barriers for doing this, lack of data. So that might explain some of this disability to use models or something like that. And they say that there is a lack of knowledge on how different stressors actually interact. And of course, these things are related. We need sort of general knowledge on interaction, and we need empirical data on the actual cases. If you want to see anything more, we've written a report, and we're working on a paper where we also will get more into the guidelines as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. It's really a precious effort what Erik has done with his colleagues to show and document this heterogeneity, this lack of coherence in management regimes dealing with cumulative impact is symptomatic of the situation we have not only in Norway but internationally, and these are issues that are important to address while doing the science, so while trying to develop our knowledge on these issues. We have one question for Erik, time for one question as we prepare our panel. We can also address Erik during the panel debate. Please, Michaela.
You said we are likely to find similar results in other countries, but looking at all these regulations and tools that you listed, is the reason for not finding more like systematic approach to this the siloed structure of our governance? Like having different directorates being in charge of different bits and pieces? Or is it like a general thing that would happen anyway, even if we would like have a NOAA or something like that?
Yeah. Thank you. It is obviously a sort of general problem out there, both in Norway and internationally. I guess partly it's about data, and we don't have the science for this. But as I know also from other projects, that different sector authorities, they don't necessarily see this broader picture. They don't necessarily catch up on other types of laws. So they see their own sector law and say, well, this is good stuff, you know. We are doing environmental soundness assessments here, and it's good. So they don't necessarily see these cumulative impact assessments. So maybe not the director as such, but there is some sort of silo blinding to some people in management. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for Michaela for the question. I think we are ready to gather the panel on stage. Thanks to all the speakers today and all the speakers of this, as I was said, long session starting yesterday, covering 5 parts. What we will do during the panel debate, we will address some of the recurring themes that we've seen during the last 2 days. These are general themes related to climate change, so challenges with climate change and cumulative impact. So we will, together with Igor Olaes, we have brought together and tried to summarize some of the main aspects and the main challenges that confront us, and we will discuss with our panel both the challenges but also some of the solutions that were presented by the panel and by some of the other speakers the last 2 days. Some of the recurrent themes we have heard yesterday, today, and in our field. One is the rapid change we see in these areas, in particular due to climate-driven change, and we heard that biodiversity changes, ecosystem reorganizes, and the speed of change is challenging science at the moment as well as management. So we, for the panel, and we can start with Bodil, who had a talk of on, and have the mic, and it's really what type of challenges you see and what possible solutions you see with regard to rapid change in biodiversity in the Arctic.
Okay, I have to start. I have scribbled some notes. I have a few thoughts that are not necessarily connected, but a few things that I thought I would mention. One is we've seen there's some unexpected events also happening and affecting what we observe and what we manage. And that's maybe one thing that is worth exploring a bit more, and like painting scenarios of different directions so that we've at least thought through some things that might be unexpected. Then I think one thing that came to mind is we have to kind of educate in complexity how to the next generation and after. There's a lot of gray hair, if I may say, on the stage. And so we have to educate in complexity thinking. Otherwise, we won't get there. I think that's an important point. Sorry, that was not... And no, I don't dye my hair, by the way. And then I think, and that came through here too, and we talked about it this morning, I mean, the collaborative work, and I think that's great about these types of sessions and information exchange, is to look at, how others do things, and what can we and what can we learn from other areas, but also other disciplines. So that was a bit all over the place, but
Yep.
still.
But very pertinent. So thanks, Bodil. Benjamin was taking over the mic. Yes.
Yeah.
Benjamin, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I will add a comment with my hat from being chair of the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Group for the Norwegian Sea, and reporting on some changes that are happening at ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, on these assessments. Because, so you're talking about rapid changes and changes, and up to now, most of the integrated ecosystem assessments are focused on the past, on assessing what is the situation, how has the situation changed in the past, where are we now? And this is now changing. There is a movement to actually include in these assessments anticipation of upcoming changes. So we have a focus on collecting data, observation, synthesizing this information and reporting, but we also have a focus on being prepared for the upcoming changes. And this includes a diversity of tools. I mean, there are, of course, statistical models like the ones I have presented, but there's also exercise like horizon scanning, looking at the upcoming challenges and so on. So I think this is, it's a mental change in the way these institutions function, to actually not just stop at where we were and where we're at, but thinking, okay, where are we going to be in near and medium term future?
Thanks, Benjamin. And Martin, please, there was Ronja presented the idea of dynamic and adaptive approaches to management.
Yeah, let me get to that. But before that, I would actually spin on what you started and say, actually, the one of the principal things that we have to do is accept that change is happening. And we haven't embraced that yet fully. So there are a lot of techniques that can bring us there. They include visioning of the future, because we can actually, by visioning a future, also draw the resources to work towards that future, something that we haven't mentioned in this session, actually. But then also consider the changes that are coming specifically as they are forecast, anticipated through oceanographic models, climate models, oceanographic models, partly also, of course, biological models. Those things are not normally informing our actions and also on our management plans. And one particular thing, and then I'm coming to address your question, is, of course, in principle, know what Benjamin referred to also, we just don't know everything, and we will not be able to know everything, and we will be still surprised next year about the complex responses of nature, even if we had done our best to manage for them. But the point is, therefore, please build in insurance mechanisms. And one of the best insurance mechanisms that we have is, of course, to implement networks of marine protected conserved area, where we, to the degree necessary, leave that stuff alone. And see what actually giving biodiversity the space to respond, and to the space to adapt, as it's put in technical terms. And then it comes, of course, to Ronja's point, is what dimensions of this area-based conservation do we have available to actually make even area-based conservation working to the best degree? Yes, there are all these elements that we reported on: the size, the placement, the identification, but then also the tools, the management tools, and their setup within the frameworks of established measures like marine protected areas, OSCMs. What are the objectives? What are we managing these, or what are we managing these areas for? And that's the kind of last thing that is important here. If we continue with, let's say, a red list approach to conservation, we will not get far on this agenda. We basically have to get ahead of the curve and look at these functions, the connections, the relations, including the ones to people that we discussed this morning, the rationality of things, and put our weight and knowledge there.
Thanks, Martin. And then Martin may want to
Thanks, Martin.
add.
So I just like to echo all the previous speakers. I fully acknowledge that we need to move beyond assessing past and current changes, and we need to move towards more and anticipating what is on our doorstep. And to some extent, we can maybe learn from other areas that have been facing the same cocktail of pressures. So we can learn from looking at examples elsewhere. But if that's not enough, we really need to embrace this kind of foresight workshops where we really try to hash out what if this happens, what should we then do, and these kind. And in that case, predictive modeling or conceptual modeling would likely be very valuable. And from a management standpoint, I think we do need more flexible and agile governance and management systems that can really act in the event of a sudden and quite unpleasant surprise. So we do need that, and also say that not having knowledge and living with a lot of uncertainty, we can still manage by adopting a precautionary approach. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. We need to use them wisely.
For sure. So you said already, Martin, and you do work with the uncertainties. You work with modeling the future, or projections into the future. We mentioned already the complexity gap that is confronting us with regard to cumulative impact, and this idea of synergies, interactions between stressors, climate amplifying risk, cumulative risk. So we are going to touch on that and then follow the whole panel to Eric, who told us something about how interactions are. So, but we can start with Martin, and if you want, on interactions between stresses.
Yeah, first of all, my first sort of take-home message is that we are misusing the term. We're always referring to cumulative impacts, but that by default means an additive impact. So the actual use of the term is wrong, because we don't really know if it's additive or not. We don't know if it's synergistic or antagonistic, and that's where we need to really invest our science. And that can be done from multiple ways. We've seen data-driven approaches, we've seen modeling approaches, there's experimental approaches, and we need to combine these such that we can scale from individual level up to higher levels. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done, because this is really crucial. If we're operating with a synergistic effect, then we're really in the harm's way. Then there's really drastic management measures that needs to be taken. If, on the other hand, we're operating with an antagonistic, then we're status quo and just sit and wait and let these threats cancel each other out. So it's really crucial to better understand this.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about something that may actually is more based on what you said, that you treat ecosystem-based management or the ecosystem approach and cumulative impacts in synonymously for the sake of your study. And I would like to get to some thing that we discussed we very much discussed in the EA group of PAIM, or the Arctic Council, and that also came up this morning, and that is about the values that people hold for the nature, and that we actually have on that side also not done our homework to actually see what all do we actually have to manage for, what impacts do we have to consider, what values do we need to manage for, what all do we stack on top of that population, that stock, that habitat, that ecosystem. How do we all relate to it, and what therefore should we all consider impacts for? there lies, I think, and I made this very complicated question this morning, there I think lies an opportunity to look into what the connections between people and biodiversity, the connections between biodiversity and biodiversity actually, and the connections between biodiversity and habitat ecosystems actually, how we value them, how they actually together deliver on something that we perceive as conservable or manage it to be managed for. And I think there's lots to be learned on top of just looking into how indigenous peoples in the Arctic treat that, but also in how we actually have to learn how to give back. How do we learn how to value the relations as such and not only as individual pieces? And then I think we get a better idea of what impacts cumulative, synergistic, and additive might be. Sorry, that might be a complicated question, but I think that's where the journey is going at the moment. By stomping on the stage.
Please, Benjamin.
I'll just go back to this issue of is cumulative additive or synergistic or antagonistic. I think this is a very fascinating question from a scientific perspective, but it's extremely difficult to answer in most cases in natural systems. We can do it in experimental setups, and even there it's complicated when you have many factors. And the time scale for a decision and for solving these issues is not the same. We have to take a lot of decisions now, and we don't have the resource, and we don't know if we will ever have the resource to actually answer clearly the question, is it antagonistic or synergistic? But I remember my background in a lot of analysis and studies that I did was, one of them was looking at this limiting factor theory that was built in, I think, early 19th century. And in limiting factor theory, you grow a plant, and if there is not enough water, then it's the water it's the limiting factor. If there is not enough light, it's the light that's the limiting factor. If there's not enough nitrate, it's the nitrate that's the limiting factor. So, and you can actually, of course, the growth of the plant depends on having enough nitrate, water, light, and so on. But by looking at things individually, you can already learn a lot, and you can already learn a lot about where are the limits that we should not cross. So I think, although because I'm a scientist, I'm really excited about these questions of resolving synergistic, antagonistic, and so on. I think for action, maybe I think that what we have with single effects and thresholds on individual pressures is actually extremely valuable to take decisions today.
Thanks. And
The mic hasn't reached you yet. So.
sent, yeah.
You're willing to?
Erik, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess I will be partly on this. Do we know enough about stressor interaction? Obviously not. And will we ever? Probably not. So we must have some ways of dealing with. So we need to, we have to try to speed up the science by making it more efficient. But I think we certainly need to improve the connections between managers and scientists. We need to, I think, both build a sort of structure that makes that more efficient than it is today, at least from what I see in the Norwegian context, which I know the best. I'd say also, it seems many have like the perspective of like the Arctic Ocean here, as we talk, or the Barents Sea, which are big systems, and they get quite large resources in terms of ecology, science, and so on. At least if you compare with parts of the coast in many areas which have their own specificities. So how is the knowledge there to act, and how can you cope with that? How can you have a sort of interaction between science and management that is effective? And that's a different challenge than these big programs you might get, and then say the whole coast of Norway. Well, it's smaller than the Arctic Ocean, but it's in one way it's more complex, at least if you include all the human interactions as well. So we'll never have all the empirical knowledge that we need to do, real knowledge-based management there. And I thought I'd also like to say, well, things are moving faster, so we should move faster. Yeah, sure, we got to be more efficient and all that. But I think we also need to learn some of these people that are saying, you know, why are these processes of getting a license or whatever taking so long? Well, things have to take some time to make a decision that makes sense for the future. You know, we can't, irreversible. So yeah, we should do them fast and as fast as possible, but not faster than that. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks. And Budil, we move to the last topic. This has been covered during this Arctic Frontiers because of geopolitical tensions threatening or at least hindering collaboration, cooperation across the Arctic. Eric was mentioning big programs. There is one that is coming, and Budil knows all about it, the Pulave Arctic Ocean 2050. It's one example of scientific collaboration, broad scientific collaboration we will need for the future to address the challenges, the complexities of cumulative impact and human impact of human activities. So in your experience, to help stimulate, what could be the next steps in light of geopolitical tensions?
Wow. Okay. Well, I think inherently the complexities of the issues need collaboration and working together, of course. And we do have quite a number of settings that we can use, and I think we should continue to use them. We've gone through a bit of a crisis with the Arctic Council, but it's still there. And we have established groups that bring together at some regulated frequency and, you know, within some sort of safe space, people from around the Arctic and beyond. I think we should use them, and we are. There's many on the audience. We meet each other on with various hats and various venues, and that creates knowledge of each other's interests and knowledge status, and I think that's key. And with all the AI out there, there's still actually people on this planet, and there will be for a little while at least, I hope. So I think we can't like get rid of people in these interactions we have and replace that fully digitally. So I think we can create new spaces, but we also actually have a lot that we can use and we are using. And not the least, it's about people. It's about us creating communications to solve problems, and that's where things happen, I think.
Thanks a lot. And Martin, please.
Yeah, I offer two things. So the first one is, it makes sense once you hear it, I hope, is why don't we organize ourselves in communities of practice of things that are actually agreed, that countries, that societal members have agreed they would like to establish or cooperate on. I think there's lots of space in that. Ecosystem-based management might be one of those, establishing systems of area-based conservation measures. These are things we can actually even have a role to play for showing that we continue to collaborate in times of geopolitical tensions. So I think that's something worthwhile. Dedicated groups that work on agreed that are having universal or standing character. There is a little bit of food for thought, I think, that I want to say, and it is about something that just entered into force 2 weeks ago. It's the BBNJ, or UN High Seas Treaty, and I really recommend to take a quick read of the main objectives and preambles, or and paragraphs in there, because in many ways it reflects, let's say, current thinking of what we should do and how we should do it when it comes to ocean protection and ocean management, much better than previous older agreements. So it basically puts the obligations onto states to states to cooperate within the existing instruments and beyond the existing instruments. So there is a clear path for cooperation laid out in this. And when I say we could look into that, I also think that kind of would stand as well, also in national context to heed. Something that you put on the board with the different rules and regulation sets that apply. There has to be an obligation to cooperate across these for the sake of protecting nature, and so I think we can look into that. and not only heeded for the Central Arctic Ocean, which is the point that I want to make. Let's get cracking. But also nationally in terms of its philosophy and and the spirit of it.
Thanks. Thank you, Martin. We are in the closing, so unfortunately time ran up. I would like to thank the speakers of the panel with a big applause for providing important insights on these overarching topics that essentially are threatening and feel quite daunting regarding climate change and cumulative impact. We close the session. And Igor, myself, and the other coordinators would like to thank all the speakers, the technical staff, Arctic Frontiers, for helping hosting. Satisfied with it. It's called Arctic Transformation. The Arctic is transforming, but we were transformed by the meetings and the discussions and all the exchanges that we had in a very positive manner. Thank you very much.